The mahogany table stretched between us like a battlefield. My brother Marcus sat across from me, his lawyer shuffling papers with the kind of confidence that comes from never losing a case. The whole family was there. Mom, Dad, my sister Rachel, even Uncle Pete, who'd driven down from Sacramento. They all had that look, the one I'd seen too many times growing up. Disappointment mixed with pity. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. David, Mom said, her voice carrying that familiar tone of gentle condescension, maybe it's time you faced reality. I'd been sitting in silence for 20 minutes while they discussed my future like I wasn't even there. At 32, apparently I was still the family failure, the one who never quite measured up to Marcus and his law degree, his downtown practice, his perfect suburban life with Amanda and their twin boys. The lawyer, some hotshot named Harrison Webb from the most expensive firm in Chicago, finally looked up from his documents. His eyes swept the room, taking inventory of the family hierarchy. When his gaze landed on me, slouched in my chair wearing a wrinkled button-down and jeans, I saw exactly what everyone else saw. The disappointment. The black sheep. The one who'd never amount to anything. But then something shifted in his expression. His eyes narrowed slightly, studying my face with sudden intensity. The confident shuffle of papers stopped. His perfectly manicured hands went still. "Excuse me," he said, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. Are you Colonel David Mitchell?" The room went dead silent. Growing up as the younger Mitchell brother meant living in Marcus's shadow from day one. While he was collecting academic awards and leading student council, I was the kid who got suspended for fighting, who barely scraped by in classes, who seemed to have a talent for finding trouble wherever I went. Dad owned a successful construction company, Mitchell & Sons, though it should have been Mitchell & Son, singular. The plan was always for Marcus to handle the legal side of the business while I learned the trades. But Marcus had bigger dreams. Harvard Law School called, and Dad couldn't have been prouder. Me? I had different plans too, but nobody was interested in hearing them. The day I turned 18, I walked into the Army recruitment office in downtown Portland. Sergeant Rodriguez looked me up and down, saw a skinny kid with attitude problems and questionable grades, and probably figured I'd wash out in basic training. But something about the structure, the discipline, the clear expectations, it all clicked for me in a way that high school never had. I didn't tell my family until after I'd signed the papers. The reaction was about what you'd expect. "David, this is just another way of running from responsibility," Dad said, not even looking up from his newspaper. "When you come crawling back in a few years, don't expect the construction job to be waiting." Mom tried to be supportive, but I could see the worry in her eyes. Not worry about my safety, worry about my future, about what people would think, about how she'd explain to her friends that her youngest son had chosen the military over college. Marcus was the only one who seemed genuinely concerned. "Are you sure about this?" he asked when we were alone. "There are other options. Community college, trade school." "I'm sure," I told him, though I wasn't sure about anything except that I needed to get out of that house, away from the constant comparisons and disappointed sighs. Basic training at Fort Benning was exactly what I needed. For the first time in my life, success wasn't measured against Marcus's achievements. It was measured against my own ability to push through obstacles, to lead when leadership was needed, to make split-second decisions under pressure. I thrived. My drill sergeant, a tough-as-nails veteran named Staff Sergeant Williams, pulled me aside during week 6. "Mitchell," he said, "you've got something. Raw talent, but it's there. You thinking about making this a career?" I hadn't been, but something about his words planted a seed. Maybe this was where I belonged. Maybe this was where I could finally be more than just Marcus's less successful brother. The family visited exactly once during my 8 years of active duty. I was stationed at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, and they made the drive down for a long weekend. By then, I'd made sergeant and was leading a squad of 12 soldiers. I'd completed Ranger School, airborne training, and was being considered for promotion to staff sergeant ahead of schedule. But all Dad wanted to talk about was how Marcus had made partner at his firm, how he'd bought a house in the suburbs, how he and Amanda were trying for kids. "That's great," I said, watching my soldiers run PT in the distance. "Really great." "David," Mom said gently, "you know you can't do this forever. What's your plan for when you get out?" I didn't have an answer then. The Army was my life, my identity. The idea of leaving seemed impossible. But life has a way of making decisions for you. The roadside bomb outside Kandahar took out our convoy's lead vehicle. I was in the second truck, and in the chaos that followed, the screaming, the smoke, the confusion, training kicked in. I coordinated the medical response, established a perimeter, called in air support, and got my people home. All of them. The bronze star they pinned on my chest afterward felt heavy, not because of the medal, but because of what it represented. Recognition for doing what needed to be done when everything went to hell. When I called home to tell them about the medal, Dad's response was typical, "That's nice, son." Marcus just won his biggest case yet, made the front page of the business section. 3 more deployments followed. Each time, I came back a little more changed, a little more distant from the world I'd left behind in Portland. The family gatherings became more awkward, the conversations more strained. I was advancing through the ranks, staff sergeant, sergeant first class, eventually master sergeant, but to them, I was still just playing soldier. The call came on a Tuesday morning in March. I was at the Pentagon, working on logistics for our next deployment, when my phone rang. "David?" Marcus's voice sounded strange, strained. "I need you to come home, it's Dad." The heart attack had been massive. By the time I got compassionate leave approved and flew back to Portland, he was already gone. The funeral was everything you'd expect. Businessmen in expensive suits talking about what a great contractor he'd been, how he'd built half the commercial district downtown. I stood at the graveside in my dress uniform, watching my family grieve for a man who'd never quite known what to do with me. The weight of 20 years of disappointment settled on my shoulders like a rucksack full of stones. After the service, we gathered at Marcus's house. The will reading was scheduled for the following week, but everyone knew how it would go. Marcus would inherit the business, the house, most of the assets. I'd probably get some token amount, enough to show I hadn't been completely forgotten, but not enough to matter. "So what's your plan now?" Uncle Pete asked, nursing a bourbon in Marcus's living room. 20 years is a good run, but you're still young. Time to start thinking about real life." Real life. As if the last 2 decades had been some kind of extended childhood game. I was scheduled to ship out again in 6 months. My unit was heading back to Afghanistan, and I was looking at promotion to sergeant major. The Army was offering me everything I'd ever wanted: respect, responsibility, a clear path forward. But sitting in that living room, surrounded by family who saw me as a permanent disappointment, I started to wonder if maybe they were right. Maybe it was time to face reality. The lawyer's office was downtown, all glass and steel and the kind of intimidating architecture designed to make you feel small. We filed in like mourners at a second funeral, taking our places around that mahogany table, while Harrison Webb prepared to dissect Dad's final wishes. I'd worn my dress uniform, not out of respect for the occasion, but because it was the nicest thing I owned. The ribbons on my chest felt like borrowed decoration, impressive to look at, but meaningless in this context. Webb began reading the will in that measured, professional tone lawyer's perfect. Assets, properties, business interests, all flowing to Marcus exactly as expected. I half listened, already mentally preparing for my return to base, when Webb's voice stopped mid-sentence. He was staring at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Confusion mixed with something that looked almost like recognition. "Excuse me," he said, his professional composure cracking slightly. Are you Colonel David Mitchell?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a discharged weapon. Harrison Webb's expensive pen had frozen mid-signature, his eyes locked on mine with an intensity that made everyone else in the room shift uncomfortably. "I'm sorry," Marcus said, his lawyer instincts kicking in. "Is there a problem with the will? Who's Colonel Mitchell?" Webb didn't answer immediately. He was still staring at me, and I could see the wheels turning behind his polished exterior. His hand moved slowly to his briefcase, fingers drumming against the leather with nervous energy. Harrison, his junior associate, whispered, "We should continue with the reading." But Webb wasn't listening. He pulled out his phone, thumb moving quickly across the screen. The blue glow reflected off his glasses as he scrolled through what looked like a news article. His face went pale. "My God," he breathed, "it is you." A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. The room erupted in confused murmurs. Mom leaned forward, her brow furrowed with concern. Rachel exchanged glances with Uncle Pete. Marcus looked like he was trying to solve a puzzle with half the pieces missing. Would someone please explain what's happening? Dad's business partner, Jim Crawford, demanded from the corner where he'd been quietly observing. Webb set his phone down, his professional mask slipping entirely. "Ladies and gentlemen, I need to step outside for a moment." He gathered his papers with shaking hands. "Give me 5 minutes." The door closed behind him with a soft click, leaving us in stunned silence. "David," Mom said carefully, "what was that about?" I didn't answer because I couldn't. The last few years had been classified, compartmentalized, buried under layers of security clearances and need-to-know protocols. My family knew I was military. They knew I'd been deployed. They had no idea what I'd actually been doing. Marcus was the first to break. "Are you going to tell us what's going on, or do we have to guess?" "I can't," I said simply. "Can't or won't?" "Both." The truth was more complicated than either option suggested. After my promotion to Master Sergeant, I'd been recruited for something that didn't officially exist. The kind of work that gets done in the shadows, where success is measured in disasters that never happen and threats that never materialize. Special Operations Command had been watching me for years. The Bronze Star was just the beginning. There had been other medals, other recognitions, other moments when I'd made the kind of decisions that separate career soldiers from legends. But none of it made the evening news. None of it came with parades or public ceremonies. The door opened and Webb returned, his composure somewhat restored but his hands still trembling slightly. He took his seat and picked up the will, but his eyes kept drifting back to me. "I apologize for the interruption," he said. "Let's continue." But the atmosphere had changed. The easy assumption of hierarchy, the comfortable knowledge of everyone's place in the family pecking order, had been shattered by whatever Webb had seen on his phone. He read through the remaining assets mechanically: vacation property in Oregon, investment accounts, personal effects. Marcus inherited the lion's share, as expected. Rachel got the family cabin. I received Dad's tools and a modest cash settlement. "That concludes the primary bequests," Webb announced. "However, there is one additional item." He pulled out a separate document, sealed in an envelope that looked older than the rest of the paperwork. "Your father left specific instructions that this was to be opened only in the presence of both sons, and only after the primary will had been read." Marcus and I exchanged glances. In 32 years, Dad had never done anything that required both of us to be present. We'd lived parallel lives, intersecting only at holidays and family emergencies. Webb's hands were steadier now as he broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper in Dad's unmistakable handwriting. "To my sons," he read aloud, "I know I wasn't the father either of you deserved. Marcus, you exceeded every expectation I had, and I'm proud of the man you've become. David, I never understood your choices, but I understand now that I was wrong to judge them." The room was completely silent. Even the traffic noise from the street below seemed to have stopped. 3 months ago, I received a phone call from the Pentagon. They couldn't tell me details, but they wanted me to know that my son had been awarded the Distinguished Service Cross for extraordinary heroism in combat. They said he'd saved the lives of an entire Afghan village and prevented a terrorist attack that would have killed hundreds of American soldiers. Mom gasped. Rachel's hand flew to her mouth. The officer who called said that Colonel Mitchell, my David, was one of the most decorated soldiers of his generation. That he'd been personally commended by the Secretary of Defense. That his actions had prevented international incidents I'd never hear about on the news. Webb's voice was barely above a whisper now. He said my son was a hero, and that I should be proud. I realized then that I'd been measuring success with the wrong ruler. Marcus, you've built a life that everyone can see and admire. David, you've built a life that protects everyone else's ability to do the same. The lawyer looked up from the paper, his eyes finding mine across the table. Therefore, I'm leaving the business to Marcus, because he'll run it well. But I'm leaving the family legacy to David, because he's already carried it further than I ever imagined possible. Uncle Pete cleared his throat. What does that mean exactly? The family legacy? Webb consulted the document again. It means Colonel Mitchell receives all remaining assets not previously distributed. The properties, the investment accounts, the savings, everything comes to approximately $2.3 million. The number hit the room like a physical blow. Marcus sat back in his chair, his face cycling through expressions of shock, confusion, and something that might have been hurt. There's more, Webb continued. Your father established a trust fund for David's future children, and another for continuing education expenses should he choose to pursue civilian credentials after his military service. But the business, Marcus said weakly, I thought. The business goes to you, as stated. Your father felt that would be the best fit for your skills and interests. But the rest? Webb gestured vaguely at the document spread across the table. I stood up abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. I need some air. The hallway outside Webb's office was lined with portraits of the firm's founding partners, stern-faced men in expensive suits who'd probably never wondered if they were measuring up to someone else's expectations. I leaned against the wall, trying to process what had just happened. The door opened behind me, and Marcus emerged. David, he said, his voice carefully controlled. We need to talk. I turned to face him, seeing my brother clearly for maybe the first time since we were kids. He looked tired, older than his 34 years, carrying the weight of everyone's expectations the same way I'd been carrying the weight of everyone's disappointments. I had no idea, he said simply. You weren't supposed to. A colonel? How long have you been a colonel? 2 years. And the medal? The Distinguished Service Cross? Last year. He nodded slowly, processing information that recontextualized everything he thought he knew about his little brother. Why didn't you tell us? The question hung between us like a bridge I wasn't sure I wanted to cross. Because the answer was complicated, layered with years of feeling like nothing I did would ever be good enough. Like my choices would always be seen as running away from real responsibility. Would it have mattered? I asked finally. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Yeah, he said eventually, it would have mattered. Back in the conference room, the family was still processing the revelation. Webb had pulled up news articles on his laptop, showing them to Mom and Rachel. I caught glimpses of headlines as I passed. Special Operations Victory in Afghanistan. Counterterrorism success prevents major attack. Distinguished Service Cross recipients. My face wasn't in any of the photos. That was intentional. The kind of work I did required anonymity, the ability to move through the world without recognition. But here, in this room full of people who'd known me since I was a kid getting into fights at school, the anonymity was finally broken. The silence in Webb's office had turned from shocked to uncomfortable. Mom kept glancing between Marcus and me like she was trying to reconcile two different versions of reality. Rachel was scrolling through her phone, probably Googling everything she could find about military decorations and special operations. Uncle Pete broke the tension first. So let me get this straight. David's been some kind of secret super soldier this whole time and none of us knew? That's not entirely accurate, I said, settling back into my chair, but close enough. Webb closed his laptop with a soft click. If I may, he said, his professional demeanor fully restored, there are some practical matters we need to discuss. The inheritance, the trust funds, the legal implications of— Hold on, Marcus interrupted. Before we get into logistics, I think we need to address the elephant in the room. He turned to face me directly. David, I owe you an apology. We all do. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Part of me wanted to accept them, to let 20 years of frustration and disappointment dissolve into this moment of recognition. But another part, the part that had been hardened by years of combat and classified operations, wasn't ready to let go that easily. You don't owe me anything, I said. Yes, I do, we all do. Mom's voice was thick with emotion. We treated you like you were wasting your life, and you were out there. She gestured helplessly at the newspaper clippings Webb had printed. You were saving lives. I was doing my job. Your job was being a hero, Rachel said quietly, and we made you feel like a failure for it. The word hero sat uncomfortably in the room. In the military, we don't talk about heroes. We talk about operators, about missions, about getting the job done. Heroism is what civilians call it afterward, when they're trying to make sense of decisions that had to be made in real time with incomplete information. Can I ask you something? Marcus said. The night you enlisted, when you came home and told us you'd already signed the papers. Were you running away from us or running towards something? It was a fair question, one I'd asked myself countless times over the years. Both, I admitted. I was 17 years old, and I felt like I was drowning. Like nothing I did would ever be good enough. The Army gave me a chance to prove myself on my own terms. And you did, Webb interjected. More than prove yourself. According to what I've found, you've been involved in operations that prevented terrorist attacks, rescued hostages, and eliminated high-value targets across 3 continents. That's classified, I said sharply. The details are classified. The commendations are public record for anyone who knows where to look. He was right, of course. The broad strokes of my career were documented in awards and citations, even if the specifics remained buried in Pentagon files. But seeing it laid out like that, reduced to bullet points and newspaper mentions, felt strange, like reading about someone else's life. There's something else, Webb continued, consulting his notes. Your father established a foundation in your name, the Mitchell Foundation for Veterans Affairs. It's funded with $500,000 from his estate, with instructions that you're to serve as director if you choose to accept the position. This was news to everyone in the room, including me. Dad had never mentioned anything about a foundation, never indicated any particular interest in veterans' issues. When did he set this up, I asked. The paperwork is dated 6 months ago, right after he received that phone call from the Pentagon. 6 months. Dad had lived for 6 months knowing about my military record, knowing about the medals and the commendations and the classified operations, and he'd never said a word. Instead, he'd quietly restructured his entire estate, established a foundation, and written a letter that would only be read after his death. Why didn't he tell me? The question came out more vulnerable than I'd intended. Webb set down his papers and looked at me with something approaching kindness. According to his instructions, he felt he'd already said too much over the years, words that couldn't be taken back. He thought actions might speak louder. Marcus was studying the foundation documents with the focused intensity he usually reserved for legal briefs. This is substantial, he said. $500,000 in initial funding, with provisions for ongoing donations and grant applications. He's essentially given you the resources to build something significant. Build what exactly? That's up to you. The charter is intentionally broad. Support for veterans' mental health, job training programs, family services. Anything that falls under the general umbrella of Veterans Affairs. I thought about the soldiers I'd served with, the ones who'd made it home and the ones who hadn't. The guys who struggled with PTSD, who couldn't find work, who felt as disconnected from civilian life as I'd felt from my own family. Maybe Dad had understood more than I'd given him credit for. There's one more thing, Webb said, pulling out a final envelope. This was in your father's safe deposit box, with instructions that it be given to David personally. He handed me a thick manila envelope with my name written on the front in Dad's careful handwriting. Inside was a collection of newspaper clippings, printed emails, and photographs I'd never seen before. The first clipping was from the Portland Tribune, dated 8 years ago. The headline read, "Local soldier receives Bronze Star for heroism in Afghanistan." Below it was a photo of me in dress uniform, standing at attention while some general pinned the medal to my chest. How did he get this? I asked. He hired a private investigator, Webb explained. After your first deployment, he wanted to know what you were really doing over there. The investigator compiled everything he could find about your military service. I flipped through the collection with growing amazement. There were photos from ceremonies I'd forgotten about, citations for medals I'd never mentioned to anyone, even a letter from the family of an Afghan interpreter, whose life I'd saved during a convoy ambush. He kept all of this? He kept everything. There's more in the safe deposit box. Medals, commendations, even some personal effects you left behind when you enlisted. The last item in the envelope was a handwritten note on Dad's letterhead. "David," it read, "I know I never said this when it mattered, but I'm proud of you. I'm proud of the man you became, and I'm proud of the choice you made to serve. I may not have understood it at the time, but I understand now that you found your calling. You became the kind of person who runs toward danger so others don't have to. That takes a kind of courage I never had. Your mother and I used to worry that you were running away from responsibility. Now I know you were running toward it. I love you, son. I always have." The room had gone quiet again, but this time it felt different. Not the uncomfortable silence of people who didn't know what to say, but the contemplative quiet of people processing something profound. "He came to see me last month," Webb said into the silence. "He was worried about his heart, said he wanted to make sure everything was in order. But mostly he wanted to talk about you, about how he'd missed your true calling for so many years." "What did he say?" "That he'd spent so much time trying to make you into the son he thought he wanted that he'd failed to see the son he actually had. He said you'd found your purpose while the rest of us were still trying to figure out what success looked like." I folded the letter carefully and slipped it back into the envelope. 20 years of feeling like a disappointment, and it turned out Dad had been keeping a scrapbook of my achievements. The irony wasn't lost on me. "So what happens now?" Rachel asked. It was a good question. The will had been read, the secrets revealed, the family dynamics permanently altered. But knowledge doesn't automatically translate into reconciliation. Understanding doesn't immediately heal 20 years of misunderstanding. "Now we figure out how to move forward," I said. "All of us." Marcus nodded slowly. "The foundation. Do you want help with it? I mean, I know about nonprofit law, grant applications, that sort of thing." It was an olive branch, and we both knew it. A way for him to contribute to something that mattered to me the way I'd never been able to contribute to anything that mattered to him. "Yeah," I said, "I'd like that." Webb began gathering his papers. The legal portion of the afternoon officially concluded. But the real work, the work of rebuilding a family that had been fractured by misunderstanding and pride, was just beginning. As we prepared to leave, Mom approached me with tears in her eyes. "David, can you forgive us? Can you forgive me for not understanding?" I looked at her, this woman who'd raised me and worried about me and never quite known what to do with me. "There's nothing to forgive," I said. "We all did the best we could with what we knew." But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't entirely true. Forgiveness would take time, just like trust would take time. Understanding each other was just the first step in a much longer journey. 3 weeks after the will reading, I was back at Fort Bragg, staring at discharge papers I'd never planned to sign. The inheritance had changed everything, but not in the way anyone expected. Captain Sarah Chen knocked on my office door at 0800 sharp. "Sir, General Morrison wants to see you in his office. Immediately." I'd been expecting this meeting since I'd submitted my request for early retirement. 20 years of service meant I was eligible for full benefits, but leaving at the peak of my career, with a promotion to full colonel pending, wasn't something the Army let go without a fight. General Morrison was sitting behind his desk when I entered, my service records spread out in front of him like evidence in a court-martial. 3 bronze stars, the Distinguished Service, Cross, 2 Purple Hearts, and a classified commendation from the Joint Chiefs that most people would never know existed. "Colonel Mitchell," he said without looking up, "take a seat." I sat at attention, hands folded in my lap, waiting for the lecture I knew was coming. 20 years, he said finally. 20 years of exemplary service. And you want to throw it all away for what, a family business in Oregon? Permission to speak freely, sir? He waved his hand dismissively. "David, we're alone. Drop the formality. What the hell is this really about?" I'd known General Morrison for 6 years, served under him in Afghanistan, trusted him with my life more times than I could count. If anyone deserved the truth, it was him. "It's about second chances," I said, "for me and for my family." "Second chances?" He leaned back in his chair. "Son, you're looking at promotion to full colonel within 6 months. Command of your own unit. After that, who knows?" General Morrison started as a lieutenant just like you did. I know, sir, and I'm grateful for the opportunity, but I need to go home. He studied me with the intensity of a man who'd made his career reading people under pressure. This is about your father's death, isn't it? Partially. And the money? The money gives me options I never had before. The foundation Dad set up, it could actually make a difference for veterans transitioning back to civilian life. I've seen too many good soldiers struggle with that transition. Morrison nodded slowly. I read about the foundation, $500,000 in initial funding, with your family's construction company providing job training programs. It's ambitious. It's necessary. Maybe, but you could do more good here, in uniform. One more deployment, one more mission. Sir, with respect, I've been on 11 deployments. I've spent more time in combat zones than I have in my own country. I've missed every family holiday, every birthday, every funeral except my father's. I'm 32 years old, and I don't know who I am outside of this uniform. The words came out more raw than I'd intended. Morrison was quiet for a long moment, processing what I'd said. The Pentagon called your house 3 months ago, he said finally, to tell your father about the Distinguished Service Cross. Did you know about that? I found out by reading. Do you know what he said when they told him? I shook my head. He said he was proud of you. Said he'd always been proud, but had never known how to tell you. The officer who made the call said your father cried. The image of Dad crying, something I'd never seen in my entire life, hit me harder than I expected. He never said anything. Maybe he didn't know how. Maybe he was waiting for the right moment, and the heart attack got him first. Morrison closed my file. David, I'm not going to try to talk you out of this. You've earned the right to make your own choices, but I want you to understand what you're walking away from. I understand, sir. Do you? Because there's something in your classified file that even you don't know about. He pulled out a folder marked with security classifications I'd never seen before. 3 weeks ago, the Secretary of Defense personally recommended you for the Medal of Honor for your actions in Syria last year. The Medal of Honor, the highest military decoration, awarded to fewer than 3,500 service members in the entire history of the United States. I sat back in my chair, stunned. The operation where you prevented the chemical weapons attack, intelligence indicates you saved potentially thousands of lives, including an entire refugee camp. The recommendation is already working its way through Congress. I was doing my job. You were doing everyone's job. The intel was wrong, the extraction plan fell apart, and you improvised a solution that prevented an international catastrophe. That's not just doing your job. That's defining what the job should be. I thought about that night in Syria, the impossible choices and split-second decisions that had somehow led to success. At the time, it had felt like controlled chaos. Now, apparently, it was Medal of Honor material. When would the ceremony be? If approved, probably 6 months from now. The president himself would present it. 6 months. The same time frame Morrison had mentioned for my promotion to full colonel. The Army was offering me everything a soldier could want. Recognition, advancement, a legacy that would outlast my own lifetime. Sir, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Go ahead. If I stay, if I accept the promotion and continue my career, what happens to the foundation, to my family? Morrison was quiet for a long moment. The foundation will get built whether you're there or not. Your brother seems capable of handling the legal aspects. As for your family, he shrugged. That's not my area of expertise. But I've seen a lot of soldiers over the years. The ones who stay in for 30 years, who make it to general. They tend to be the ones who don't have much waiting for them on the outside. The ones who leave at 20, who walk away from promising careers, they usually have something worth walking toward. It was the closest thing to advice he was going to give me, and we both knew it. I'll need an answer by Friday, he said. The Medal of Honor recommendation needs to be withdrawn if you're not going to be here to receive it. Understood, sir. David? He stood up as I reached for the door. Whatever you decide, you've been one of the best soldiers I've ever served with. The Army is better because you were in it, and it'll be worse when you leave." I saluted him one last time and walked out into the North Carolina sunshine, my mind spinning with possibilities I'd never considered. That night, I called Marcus from my base quarters. The conversation was easier than it would have been a month ago, the revelation about Dad's pride having smoothed some of the rough edges between us. "They offered me the Medal of Honor," I said without preamble. "Jesus, David, that's incredible. Congratulations." "I haven't accepted it yet." "What do you mean you haven't accepted it? It's the Medal of Honor." "It means staying in the Army. Probably for another 10 years, maybe more. It means the foundation gets built without me, and the family continues the way it always has." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "What do you want to do?" It was a simple question with an impossibly complex answer. What did I want? For 20 years I'd wanted recognition, respect, the knowledge that my choices mattered. Now I had all of that and more. But I also had something else, a family that finally understood who I was, and a chance to build something meaningful with them. "I want to come home," I said finally. "I want to help veterans who are struggling the way I struggled. I want to work with you on something that matters. I want to be present for Mom's birthday for the first time in a decade." The Medal of Honor, though, David, that's immortality. That's your name in history books. History books don't visit you in the hospital when you're dying alone. It was a harsh truth, but one I'd seen played out too many times in military hospitals across the country. Decorated soldiers with chests full of medals and no one to share their stories with. "Okay," Marcus said, "then come home. We'll figure out the rest as we go." Just like that? Just like that. Family first, right? Family first. It was something Dad used to say when we were kids, usually when he was trying to get us to stop fighting long enough to pose for a Christmas photo. I'd never really understood what he meant then, but I was starting to understand now. The next morning, I walked into General Morrison's office and placed my resignation letter on his desk. 6 months later, I stood in the parking lot of what used to be Henderson's Auto Parts, watching a crew install the sign that would change everything. Mitchell Foundation Veterans Center, in bold blue letters, with smaller text underneath, Training Support Transition Services. The building didn't look like much from the outside, a converted warehouse in southeast Portland, surrounded by food trucks and small manufacturing businesses. But inside, we'd built something that felt like hope. "You sure about the location?" Marcus asked, joining me near his BMW. He was dressed for court, expensive suit and polished shoes that looked out of place in this working-class neighborhood. "This is where veterans end up when they can't afford the suburbs," I said. "Close to public transportation, cheap rent, walking distance to the VA clinic. It's perfect." He nodded, though I could tell he was still adjusting to thinking about problems through the lens of people who didn't have trust funds and family businesses to fall back on. The past 6 months had been a learning experience for both of us. "The Portland Tribune wants to do a feature story," he said, checking his phone. "About the foundation, about you coming home. I told them we'd think about it." "No interviews?" "David, we need publicity to attract donors. The initial funding won't last forever. Then we'll find other ways to raise money. Ways that don't involve turning my military service into a marketing campaign." It was an ongoing disagreement between us. Marcus understood publicity and fundraising the way I understood tactical operations. It was his area of expertise, and he was good at it. But something about turning my story into a newspaper feature felt wrong. Like exploiting the very vulnerabilities we were trying to help other veterans overcome. The front door opened, and Tommy Rodriguez emerged, wearing work clothes and a smile that had taken 3 months to develop. Tommy was our first success story, a Marine veteran who'd been sleeping in his car when he found our job training program. Now he was working construction for Dad's old company, had his own apartment, and was dating a nurse from the VA clinic. "Colonel," he called out, "we got the computer lab set up. You want to take a look?" "Just David," I reminded him for the 100th time. "And yeah, let's see what you've done." The transformation inside the building was remarkable. What had been empty warehouse space 6 months ago was now divided into classrooms, workshop areas, counseling offices, and a central common room where veterans could just exist without judgment. The computer lab was Tommy's pet project. 12 refurbished machines, where veterans could learn digital skills, update resumes, or just stay connected to the world. Sarah's class starts in an hour, Tommy said, gesturing toward the main classroom. 15 guys signed up for construction training this week, more than we've ever had. Sarah Chen, former Captain Chen, had surprised everyone by requesting early retirement shortly after I'd submitted my own papers. When I'd asked her why, she'd said something about wanting to make a difference in ways that actually felt personal. Now she ran our job training programs with the same intensity she'd once brought to military operations. Any issues I should know about? Just one. Jackson's been sleeping in the parking lot again. Third time this week. Pete Jackson was a Gulf War veteran who'd been bouncing between shelters and friends' couches for 2 years. Officially, we weren't a housing facility. Unofficially, we'd started keeping sleeping bags in the supply closet for emergencies. "I'll talk to him," I said. "Actually," Marcus interjected, "I might have a solution for that. Dad's old foreman, Mike Sullivan, has a mother-in-law unit behind his house. He's been looking for a reliable tenant, someone who can help with yard work and maintenance. It's not free, but it's cheap, and Mike's good people." It was the kind of practical problem-solving that Marcus excelled at, seeing connections, finding solutions that worked for everyone involved. Over the past 6 months, he'd become surprisingly good at understanding the complex web of challenges that veterans faced when transitioning to civilian life. "You think Mike would be okay with Pete's situation?" I asked. "I already talked to him. He said any friend of the Mitchell family is worth taking a chance on." The Mitchell family. It still felt strange to be part of something that felt like a team rather than a hierarchy. Mom had started volunteering at the center twice a week, helping veterans navigate VA paperwork and benefits applications. Rachel contributed her marketing skills, designing promotional materials, and managing our social media presence. Even Uncle Pete had gotten involved, donating tools and equipment for the workshop programs. The afternoon flew by in a blur of program updates, budget reviews, and individual check-ins with veterans at various stages of their transition journeys. By 5 o'clock, the center had mostly emptied out, leaving just the core staff and a few veterans who treated the common room like their personal living room. "David?" Sarah approached my desk, holding a folder thick with documents. "We need to talk about expansion." "Already? Look at these numbers." She spread out charts and graphs that showed program enrollment, success rates, and waiting lists. "We're at capacity in every program. Job training has a 6-week waiting list. Counseling services are booked solid through next month. And we're getting calls from veterans in Salem, Eugene, even Seattle, asking if we have satellite locations." It was the kind of problem every nonprofit dreams of having, too much demand for their services. But it was still a problem. What are you thinking? Portland Community College has approached us about a partnership. They want to offer college credit for our training programs, maybe even develop a dedicated veterans education track. It would mean academic credibility and access to federal funding sources we can't tap into as a standalone nonprofit. What's the catch? We'd have to significantly expand our scope, more programs, more staff, more facilities. We're talking about growing from a local foundation to a regional organization, maybe even statewide. I leaned back in my chair, considering the implications. 6 months ago, I'd been thinking about helping a few dozen veterans transition successfully. Now we were talking about potentially impacting thousands of lives across the Pacific Northwest. How much expansion are we talking about? Conservative estimate, triple our current budget within 2 years. Staff of 30 to 40 people, multiple locations, maybe even residential facilities for veterans who need temporary housing during their transition. The scope was overwhelming, but the need was real. Every week, we turned away veterans who needed help simply because we didn't have the resources to serve everyone who walked through our doors. What does Marcus think? Marcus thinks we should go for it. He's already started preliminary discussions with potential donors, including some of his law firm's corporate clients. Apparently, veteran services are a popular cause among companies looking for meaningful charitable partnerships. A knock on the door interrupted our conversation. Pete Jackson stood in the doorway, baseball cap in his hands, looking embarrassed. "Sorry to bother you folks," he said. "I just wanted to say thanks for the job referral. Mike Sullivan called me this afternoon. I start Monday, and he says I can move into the apartment this weekend." That's great news, Pete. Yeah, it is. He shifted awkwardly. I also wanted to apologize for sleeping in the parking lot. I know that puts you in a difficult position with the city and all. Pete, I said, standing up to shake his hand, you don't need to apologize for needing help. That's why we're here. I know, but, he paused, struggling with words. This place, what you've built here, it saved my life. Not just the job training or the counseling, but the feeling that somebody actually gives a damn whether I succeed or fail. I haven't felt that since I got out of the Army 20 years ago. After Pete left, Sarah and I sat in comfortable silence for a moment. This was why we did the work. Not for the statistics or the grant applications or the newspaper features, but for moments like this when the abstract concept of helping veterans became the concrete reality of changing individual lives. The expansion, I said finally, if we do it right. No cutting corners, no compromising on the personal touch that makes this place work. Agreed. But that means we'll need serious leadership infrastructure. Regional directors, program coordinators, maybe even a full-time fundraising staff. You interested in being director of operations for a statewide organization? Sarah grinned. Are you offering me a promotion, Mitchell? I'm offering you a chance to help build something bigger than either of us imagined 6 months ago. Then yes. Absolutely yes. The next morning, I met Marcus at the downtown office space he'd found for the Foundation's administrative headquarters. It was a far cry from the warehouse workspace we'd started, with professional conference rooms, reception area, space for a growing staff. I've been thinking about what Sarah said yesterday, Marcus said, spreading architectural plans across the conference table. About expansion, about the partnership with PCC, there's something else we should consider. What's that? Dad's legacy. Not just the money he left us, but what he actually built during his lifetime. Mitchell and Sons employed over 200 people at its peak. Dad understood something about creating opportunities for working-class families, about building something that lasted beyond his own lifetime. I studied the architectural plans, designs for a comprehensive veterans campus that would include training facilities, temporary housing, counseling centers, and even a child care facility for veterans with families. This is ambitious, I said. It's exactly what Dad would have done if he'd understood then what we understand now. He built a construction company that gave people careers, not just jobs. We're building a foundation that gives veterans futures, not just temporary assistance. The plans were impressive, but they represented a level of commitment and responsibility that felt overwhelming. We were talking about becoming a major regional institution, with all the accountability and complexity that entailed. There's something else, Marcus continued. Mom wants to be more involved. Not just volunteering a couple days a week, but actually joining the board of directors. She says it's time she did something meaningful with her time, instead of just managing Dad's social calendar. The idea of Mom serving on our board was both touching and terrifying. She had no professional experience with nonprofit management, but she understood people, and she understood loss in ways that might be valuable for our work. What do you think? I think we're about to find out if the Mitchell family can actually work together on something that matters. That evening, the whole family gathered at Marcus's house for what had become our weekly planning dinner. It was still strange, having regular family meetings that focused on collaboration rather than conflict, but it was working. I have an announcement, Mom said as we finished dessert. I've been accepted into the Master of Social Work program at Portland State. Part-time. Designed for working professionals. I start in the fall. The table went quiet. Mom was 68 years old, and she was starting graduate school. Mom, Rachel said carefully, that's a 2-year program. I know. I figure if David can spend 20 years becoming an expert in helping people under the worst possible circumstances, I can spend 2 years learning how to help people under normal circumstances. It was typical mom logic. Slightly convoluted, but ultimately sensible. And it showed the same kind of late-in-life determination to matter that had driven Dad to restructure his entire estate after learning about my military record. The foundation will pay your tuition, I said. Consider it a professional development investment. I can pay my own tuition, thank you very much. Mom, we're family. We invest in each other's success. She smiled, the first completely unguarded smile I'd seen from her in years. Family first? Family first. 3 years later, I stood in the same parking lot where this story had begun, watching a very different scene unfold. The original warehouse had been expanded into a campus that served over 300 veterans annually across 5 locations in Oregon and Washington. Mom had graduated with her MSW and now served as our Director of Family Services. Sarah had become our Regional Operations Director. Marcus had taken a sabbatical from his law practice to serve as our full-time legal counsel and strategic planning director. The Portland Tribune had finally gotten their feature story, but not the way they'd originally imagined. Instead of profiling me as a decorated veteran who'd come home, they'd written about the Mitchell Foundation as an example of how families could heal community wounds by healing their own wounds first. Colonel Mitchell? A young voice interrupted my thoughts. I turned to see a teenager in a Marine dress uniform, obviously nervous about approaching me. Just David, I said automatically. What can I do for you? My dad's inside, talking to Miss Chen about the job training program. He's been out of work for 8 months, and my mom says this place might be his last chance. What's your dad's name? Staff Sergeant Rodriguez. Miguel Rodriguez. He served 3 tours in Afghanistan. Rodriguez. No relation to Tommy, but the name brought back memories of my first recruiting sergeant, the man who'd seen potential in a skinny kid with attitude problems. How old are you? 17, sir. I ship out for boot camp in 3 months. 17. The same age I'd been when I'd walked into that recruitment office in Portland, looking for something I couldn't even name. Can I give you some advice? Yes, sir. Stay connected to your family. Write letters, make phone calls, come home when you can. The military will teach you how to be a soldier, but your family will teach you how to be a person. Don't lose sight of which one matters more. He nodded seriously, the way only teenagers can nod when they think they're receiving wisdom from their elders. Yes, sir, thank you, sir. As he walked back toward the building, I thought about the circular nature of stories, how we start in one place, travel great distances, and sometimes end up exactly where we began, but as different people carrying different understanding. I'd spent 20 years trying to prove I wasn't a failure, only to discover that success had never been about external recognition. It had been about finding ways to matter in the lives of people who needed help, whether that was soldiers under fire in Afghanistan or veterans struggling with transition in Portland. The family that had once seen me as their greatest disappointment now saw me as someone worth following into uncertain territory. The brother who'd once embodied everything I thought I could never be had become my closest collaborator and friend. The father who'd died, thinking we didn't understand each other, had left behind a foundation, literal and figurative, for building understanding. You coming inside? Marcus called from the front entrance. The board meeting starts in 10 minutes. And Mom's got some new ideas about expanding into rural communities that are either brilliant or completely insane. Knowing Mom, probably both, I said, walking toward the building that had become home in ways I'd never expected. Inside, the conference room was filling up with board members, staff, and veterans, whose lives had been changed by programs that existed because a family had learned how to see each other clearly. Sarah was reviewing quarterly reports. Mom was sketching diagrams for rural outreach programs, Rachel was updating social media metrics, and Tommy Rodriguez, now our peer counseling coordinator, was facilitating a discussion about mental health services. Family first? Marcus asked as we took our seats. Family first, I confirmed. But family, I'd learned, wasn't just about blood relatives. It was about people who chose to invest in each other's success, who showed up when things got difficult, who built something together that none of them could have built alone. The kid in the parking lot would ship out for boot camp in 3 months, just like I had 25 years earlier. But unlike me, he'd have a father who'd found stable work and purpose, a family that understood the value of service, and a community that supported veterans through all phases of their journey. That was the real victory, not the medals or the recognition or the newspaper features, but the knowledge that the next generation would have better options than the generation before. Outside, the Portland rain was starting to fall, the way it always did in November. But inside, we had work to do, problems to solve, and lives to change. The Mitchell family had finally figured out how to succeed together. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now, and hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.